You know, nothing has embraced this country than the Syrian Refugee Resettlement movement. We're in the middle of an experiment that has not taken place since 1980. If you stop and think about it, right now, this time, usually the levels come out in Parliament. So what are the immigration level targets for 2016? When you can start beginning to think that between maybe 40 to 50,000 refugees will be coming next year in total. Because not only are we expecting upwards of 33,000 Syrian refugees, because the government has committed to bringing 25,000 government-assisted refugees on top of privately sponsored, which is a demand and supply mechanism. This is all on top of the pre-existing targets for government-assisted and privately sponsored from other parts of the world. So this next year, 2016, could be unprecedented in Canadian history. And what's so amazing about it is that from coast to coast to coast, Canadians have embraced this great Canadian national project. For those of us working in agencies, suddenly we've realized what we already knew, is that we hold the power, we hold the knowledge, we have the expertise on the ground. The federal government, through cutbacks and retirements, and the same for the provincial governments, there's only a few folks left. So everybody is coming to us. The media, cities, provincial governments, federal governments, we have the knowledge and the expertise, and suddenly this is our moment as we drink from the fire hydrant, where, weeks ago, after 10 years of negative discourse of refugees, now everyone in Canada wants to be part of the great Canadian national project that Syrian refugees have become. So what does this mean? This means that Syria is for today's generation what the Southeast Asian Vietnamese boat people were for the baby boomers. Unprecedented. And so we're now in a situation where, what do we do with all these volunteers? On the average year, maybe you get 800 or 900, in the next, and within the last month, we're dealing with 4,000 that are wanting to come. We're dealing with 25,000 Touk project in Quebec, or, Stéphane has 25,000 jars of maple syrup, okay? You've got grannies on one corner of the country, you've got inner city schools raising money, you've got 7-year-old children giving up their allowance for Syria. You've got birthday parties raising money. Everyone has been embraced by what has been evolving in this country. And so, thankfully, we got a 2-month extension on the Great Canadian National Project. But shortly, I predict the second week in December, you're going to have significant air flights, chartered flights coming into this country in Montreal and Toronto, temporarily in welcome centers in those two cities, but only for a number of hours, not days. The military operation's off now. They're all coming directly to community in one of Canada's 36 refugee service hubs, as well as privately sponsored, directly into community over the course of the next several weeks. 8,000. The processing center in Beirut is doing 700 plus a week now. The processing center in Jordan was just opened this past weekend, just for government-assisted refugees. And the processing center in Turkey is not up and running yet. There are hundreds of staff, Canadians overseas now in the Middle East, ramping up various aspects of this operation. Over the past weekend, 120 of us came together in a historic working group just up the street here. This involved provincial and territorial governments, various federal departments, from IRC to Defense. The Privy Council was there, the Heritage Canada, Innovation, Science and Economic Development, Federation of Canadian Municipalities, city representatives, Resettlement Assistance Program, Red Cross, Lifeline Syria, Canadian Chambers of Commerce. We all buckled down for 2 days to better understand what are the emerging issues and solutions and innovative practices going forward. So this is where we stand. The numbers came out yesterday at 4:13 p.m. So if you want to know where your privately sponsored refugees are going in every part of the country, go to their website. They will tell you exactly where they're going, in which city, in which province. We have asked for this confirmation, and that will come on Tuesday this week. Federal, provincial, territorial ministers are meeting in Ottawa on Tuesday afternoon, where we hope they will finalize the overall numbers for Syria. Unprecedented. Tuesday morning, you will hear a lot more in the coming, hours, days. The Governor General has convened a special summit at Rideau Hall on the Syrian Refugee project on Tuesday morning. 143 people across Canada are going to be taking part in that. So where are the issues? What are the issues and the pressing points now that are emerging? The biggest concern that came out of the meeting was around the privately sponsored refugees. Okay, we know where they're going, but who are they? What are the supports needed? There is a disconnect between settlement agencies and privately sponsored, and particularly the G5. You've got a whole number of new Canadian sponsorship groups that haven't never done it before, and there's a lack of coordination connection. That's a big one. Housing allowance continues across the country, trying to find permanent housing. So lots of discussion around, we're going to take the opportunity in the coming days in Ottawa to push for a national housing strategy that benefits everybody. We're looking for money because we're having to ramp up very quickly. So we're hopeful that in the next week, so Treasury Board submission was passed last Tuesday, and we're hoping that RAP providers, as well as settlement service providers, because we've got 8,000 privately sponsored coming in the next 4 weeks, that there will be increased capacity for settlement services, link classes, case management classes, in addition to ramping up of resettlement assistance program providers. We were happy to see that for privately sponsored and government-assisted Syrians no longer will have a transportation loan. We're now advocating that the loan be buried, coffin, nails on coffin for all refugees, not just Syrians. So we're pushing that hard. Big discussion on destining, because everybody wants a Syrian refugee. Everybody, okay? So we have come up over the weekend with an assessment tool and a checklist that will be introduced to the provincial territorial ministers to help calm the need and have a proper system to assess local capacity that is being asked in this. So that clarity and process will be coming out so that we can tamper this need to destine all over the place in the middle of a crisis. Orientation, key messaging around how do we work together around key national orientation messaging in Arabic that it reinforce what you or some of you will be doing in local communities. Particularly concerned about youth. 52% of Syrians coming to Canada will be children and youth under 16. We talked a lot about what does that mean, not only as immigrant serving agencies, but school boards, parks and recreation, city governments, etc. Health and mental health. So all of you, or maybe many of you, would have known that the government released a Syrian cultural profile last Thursday morning. If you haven't seen it, it is a must-read, because that's the most comprehensive picture of who these 33,000 and increasing Syrians who will arrive in the next 13 months. But the issue of health, both chronic health and mental health, continue to be a key support. We have been advocating for decades for a mental health trauma settlement support program, and we're going to fight for this again in the midst of this crisis, to have the federal government, as part of the settlement envelope, provide us with some additional supports, because the reports continue to come out. 2/3 of Syrians will have mental health trauma-related issues, both children and adults. We talked about language assessment and training again, and more around the capacity, because in certain parts of the country there's significant wait lists, both at the assessment center and in the provision of language. Welcoming communities, we talked a lot about that. You know, how do we, or do it, is it even possible to organize welcoming communities, in the sense that there's so many organic, spontaneous events happening that are just amazing. But how do we build on that? The key being that, yes, this is the Syrian crisis, but how do we ensure that all this goodwill and energy and spontaneousness and organized anarchy, how does this all stay in place for refugee claimants, for other refugees from other world regions? We called on a national public education campaign by the Government of Canada to be launched, to take advantage of this moment in time to really nail down in a sustainable way the needs for ongoing refugees. So I think I think those were the key. There's various communication mechanisms that are being formed, but there was a lot of talk around creating sustainable communication structures with the right information and the right data being shared as quickly as possible now, that we need the funding yesterday, that we need to have the numbers absolutely confirmed. We have them for privately sponsored. Now we need them for GARs. We need the decision around the final destining. If it's not going to be one of the pre-existing 36 refugee reception centers, then we need to know that very quickly as we put in place transitional housing. So it is it's an amazing historical moment in Canadian history. And all of you, or many of you in this room, are witnessing this day in, day out in the work that you do. And yes, we're all exhausted, and this hasn't even started. But we're embracing this with, humility, with leadership, and the knowledge and the expertise that you have in working with your local community. And I have no doubt that this will be an amazing, successful, national Canadian project. Thank you very much.